Hello everyone, and today we have a fun one for you. For this video, we're going to go through the full fiberglass process from start to finish. And that means we're going to make a part from scratch, and for this one it's going to be made out of MDF board, and then from there it's going to be made into a beautiful mold. So if we want, we can make multiple parts, as many as we want, and then after we make the mold, we can go ahead and make the final product. And as you can see, it's being demolded right here, and all it needs is a little bit of cleanup, a little bit of paint, and it comes out looking like this beautiful master cylinder cover you have right here. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Yep, you can buy the same part off the internet. Unfortunately, this one right here doesn't really contour very well to the strut tower covers. In fact, there's a big gap right here, which is kind of an eyesore. So I figured I'd go ahead and make one from scratch because it's a great opportunity to show you this process from start to finish, and I figured it'd be pretty challenging. And for our first step, we need to create our shape, and this is actually known as the plug. So the initial shape or the initial part is going to be known as your plug. After that, we make our mold, and then we're going to make our final product, which is actually our part. And the plug can be made out of various materials. I'm just using MDF board because it's easy to work with, but you can use plastic, metals, even paper mache, whatever you want. And since this is a custom part, I'm not going to go through the shaping in complete detail, but you can at least see all the steps I did just in a fast forward motion. And it looks like we're done shaping the plug, so let's go ahead and prep the surface. So we're going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and go ahead and give it a light sanding all over this plug. Since this is an MDF board, we just want to go ahead and smooth it out and get it prepped and ready for primer. And look at that, it looks really nice, nice smooth edges. All right, now let's go ahead and change our environment a little bit, move it over to our paint area. So I'm going to continue by blowing it off, get all that sawdust off of it, at least for the initial blowdown. And then I'm going to take some IPA or rubbing alcohol, apply a little bit to a microfiber cloth, and then we'll go ahead and wipe down the surface, just remove any grease or any residue that could be left behind. And so far it looks pretty good. And I'll go ahead and set it on cups, just makes it easier to paint. Now let's go ahead and pull out our primer. Now this is a 2-in-1. This is a filler and a primer. I found this actually works really good on MDF board. So we'll shake for 2 minutes, wipe the nozzle with a paper towel, and we'll go ahead and start spraying with a first light coat. So we're going to spray before the part, continue spraying till after the part. So for this first coat, we just want to lightly cover the surface. And then we'll go ahead and wait about 5 to 10 minutes later, wipe the nozzle again, and apply our second coat. Now this one's going to be a little bit thicker. It's going to be like a medium coat. And that looks like we have pretty good coverage. So after about 5 to 10 minutes again, we're going to go ahead and do our third and final coat. And we want to make sure every nook and cranny is covered for this one. And yep, that looks pretty good right there. So we let this dry for about an hour, and let me pick it up and get a closer look what I'm looking at. Now you can see almost like a little fur or a little fuzziness above the primer. That's expected. MDF board is like a sponge. It soaks this stuff up, so it's going to leave that behind. But not to worry, all you have to do is grab some 400 grit sandpaper, and we're going to lightly sand the primer on top. We're not going to sand the primer off. We just want to go ahead and smooth it out. And that looks pretty good right there, nice and smooth. Even has a nice little shine to it. Feels very nice. Now picking up, see if I can show you again. Look at that, all that fur is gone. Looks like it's nice and smooth. That's pretty much what you want to work with, which is really nice. So we'll go ahead and set that down. Grab some more rubbing alcohol or IPA, microfiber cloth, and go ahead and give this another wipe down. Get rid of all that dust and debris we may have created. And with our IPA all dried up, now we can apply our clear coat. So we'll go ahead and shake the can for 2 minutes. Go ahead and wipe the nozzle with our paper towel. There we go. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing with the primer. We're going to start with a nice light coat just to kind of make it tacky. Wait 5-10 minutes and apply a second coat. And this one's a little bit more medium. Third coat, same thing, nice and medium. And then our last coat, it's going to be our fourth one. It's going to be our thickest one. We want to make sure every nook and cranny is covered and have a nice shine. And looking at that, that looks really good. Got a nice shine to it. Now, as you can see, there is a little bit of roughness to it. I guess you could say it's like orange peel. That's pretty much expected based on the paint I used and the surface I'm working with. But looking at it, yep, not the prettiest, but don't worry, we're going to go ahead and address this. So let's go ahead and let this cure for 24 hours, and I'll show you what we're going to do.
The next day.
All right, so now that the clear coat is cured, let's go ahead and grab some sandpaper. I'm going to grab 1,000 grit, and I'm going to go ahead and take a sponge, wrap the sandpaper around it, and grab a soapy water, and we're going to go ahead and wet sand our clear coat. We would basically want to smooth this out. And we're starting with 1,000 grit because it's not too abrasive, but it's not too weak where we're doing this for hours. So once we get 1,000 grit, then we're going to go ahead and move to 1,500 grit. And this kind of smooth it out a little bit more. It's going to be hard to see with the eye, but it's going to be very nice when it's all said and done. And we'll go ahead and rinse it off with some water. Make sure we get all that soap left behind. Wipe it off with our microfiber cloth. So far it looks pretty good. Looks a little dull, but that's expected. Now let's go ahead and polish it up. So I'm going to get Meguiar's compound and a nice applicator pad. Put a hefty amount on the pad and kind of spread it around. And let's go ahead and do circular motions. And all we're going to do is basically buff this out. This is where you need your elbow grease and some patience, but the more you do this, the shinier it's going to become. And now that our arm is tired, let's go ahead and wipe it all off with a microfiber cloth. So we'll get a semi-clean one and just wipe this all off. And looking at this, you can see it's already starting to get a beautiful shine. Look at that. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's see if I can do it at an angle. So the clear coat looks a lot better. It's a little bit more flatter. It's very nice because any imperfections you have here, it's going to show up in the mold, which is going to show up in your final part. So I'm happy with how this plug looks. Let's go ahead and move on to the mold. Now for the mold, we're going to take the plug and add flange material that goes all the way around it. It's basically extra material that you're going to use when you fiberglass. Now this material can pretty much be out of just a lot of common products. Like this is aluminum flashing. You can pretty much get this at your hardware store. Very cheap, easy to work with. Another product we're going to use is basically this plastic poster board. Also, you can find it at a hardware store. Very inexpensive. We're going to use this one just because it's already flat, takes up a lot of real estate, easy to bend, and it's pretty much common amongst most of you out there. So I'm going to start by going ahead and throwing this down and put our plug right on top. So right there, we covered about 75% of our plug just with that one board. So let's go ahead and cut it down to size. And the way we're going to attach our flange material, we're just basically going to use something simple, a glue gun. Pretty inexpensive, easy to get a hold of. So I'm going to start by basically getting our plug out of the way. Let's go ahead and put a little bit on this board. Don't need a lot, just enough to pretty much hold it still. And that feels like a good amount. Go and flip this over. And make sure I get it somewhat lined up centered. And come on. That looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and press this down just a little bit. Very nice. And pretty much I'm going to repeat the exact same steps that's going around this plug. So I need to go under every lip. So since this is bendable, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it down to size and bend it as I need it. And I'll go ahead and pick the camera up that we can get a better view of what I'm looking at. So far it looks pretty good. We got a lot of the area covered. Doesn't look too shabby. A little bit of glue here and there, but overall not too bad. So let's go ahead and take an IPA and some microfiber cloth and let's go ahead and clean up that excess glue we have behind. Now I could pull this away or try to scrape it away, but I noticed it actually comes off pretty easy with some rubbing alcohol. So go ahead and wipe everything down, just pretty much we don't leave anything behind. Yeah, it looks pretty good, nice and shiny. Now let me go ahead and pick this up so we can get a closer look at the next thing we're going to attack. Now right here you can see where some of these flange material areas or that plastic doesn't really meet up well. We need to basically bond these together so it's all one piece. So I'm going to start by filling everything in using this resin tape. And it's pretty much, it acts as like Scotch tape. It's nothing really fancy, it's just easy to work with and it's ideal for this particular application. And I'll cut a strip off, get it in place. Again, nothing too special. And I'll go around to every area that has a crack and go ahead and fill it in with that same tape. And I'll go ahead and shave off some excess flange material. I don't want too much hanging off, probably about 3 inches will do. So that looks pretty good. Now let's bring in the camera because there's one last area we need to address. If you look right under the plug where it meets the plastic, we have a little bit of an air gap. And this area does need to be filled in. If you don't, when you apply your gel coat, it's kind of going to go under a little bit and kind of fasten to it. Basically acts as a mechanical fastener. So we're going to take some fillet clay and go ahead and press it in between the plug and our flange material. So all you got to do is press it right in and smooth it out. You basically want to make a nice smooth surface or a nice small radius between your plug and your flange. And we're going to work all the way around the plug until it's all filled in. And now let's go ahead and take a popsicle stick and see about cleaning this up a little bit more. Not only will this get all the excess clay off, but it gives you a nice smaller radius where the plug meets the flange. It's really good for this particular application. So I'm going to go around this whole thing and kind of just shave off all the excess clay. And for the remaining clay, we'll go ahead and grab a shop towel and just clean up the rest of the surface. So by doing this, it'll not only clean it up, but it'll smooth out the edges just a little bit more. Alright, so now this is where the rubber starts meeting the road. Now we can start applying our paste wax. This is basically the same or similar as car wax you'd put on a vehicle, and this is acting as a mold release. So I'm going to take a microfiber cloth, and this is because I don't have an applicator pad that's clean. And I'm going to apply a nice thick coat of wax right on top of our plug and our flange material. And we're going to do a wax on method. So we're going to wax it on. Within a minute, let's go ahead and wax it off with a clean microfiber cloth. And this will not only get a beautiful shine, but it'll also help with the mold release process. So when we take this plug out of the mold, it shouldn't stick to it, or at least prevent it from sticking too much. And once we completed applying the first coat of wax, we're going to repeat the exact same process 2 more times. So you're going to wax on, wait about a minute, wax off, and then do it for the 3rd coat, and then just go ahead and wait about 1 hour. And after letting the wax gas off for an hour, now we can apply our mold release agent. Now I know this seems like a belt and suspenders type of evolution because we're putting two mold release products on the same mold, but trust me, it's worth it. And all you need is a little bit in a cup for this one. So we're going to fill just a little bit halfway. That's actually more than enough. And I'm going to show you two methods. I'm going to show you this foam brush method, and then later on in the video, I'll show you the spray method as well. Now for the foam brush, it's pretty easy. All you got to do is put a little bit on your brush, and then start applying very, very thin coats. You basically want it very transparent. And we're going to basically apply this very slowly in one direction as far as our first coat. And we're going to do 3 coats total, and we want to do 45 minutes in between coats. We want to make sure they're dry. And then we'll do the same thing after 45 minutes like we just said. Apply our second coat, make sure it's very thin. And then our last coat, same thing. And we'll try to switch directions just a little bit. Again, you do not want to make this thick. You want to make this thin and as clean as possible. And now we went ahead and let that dry for an hour. Now you can see little green streaks. That's normal anytime you do this type of method. Now usually when you see green streaks, that just means it was a little bit thick in this area. It's not really going to hurt it, but that's when you notice you've done a brush method versus a spray method. But overall, starting to look pretty good. We could definitely work with this. And now for the following steps of the video, we're going to make sure we have our respirator on, as well as our safety glasses. And the reason being is because our tooling gel coat right here, and this is great for making molds, it's very, very potent, and it's basically one of those you definitely want to protect yourself. And the other product that comes with it is our MAKP. This is basically our hardener or activator. This definitely can stain your clothes or any of the other things you're wearing, so make sure you wear gloves. And of course, we'll be using plenty of measuring cups. And for this one, we're going to guesstimate approximately 12 ounces. I don't have an exact number in mind, but I'm just going to try it out. Now with this tooling gel coat, you're going to want to use 1.5% of this MAKP or your hardener. So I went ahead and marked on the mixing cup where we're going to go ahead and fill it up to. So let me go ahead and open this up. And you could definitely smell how potent it is. And we'll go ahead and fill it up to the line. Yeah, that's about right there. And 1.5% of 12 ounces is 0.18 ounces, which translates to a little over 5 milliliters, which these eyedroppers are measured in, so it makes it really convenient. So once we add that to our gel coat, all we have to do is mix it up using basically a stir stick, or in this case, a popsicle stick. And we're going to stir this up for at least 1 minute. And now we can work our way to our plug and start applying our tooling gel coat. Now for this one, I'm going to use the brush method, but later on in the video, I'm going to show you both the brush method and the spray method. Now I do prefer using a spray gun just because you get nice even coats and you can control the volume, but I understand not everyone has an air compressor at home. So when we're using the brush, we're going to go ahead and start applying it right to both the part and the flange. Now if you look at it, I have very thin coats right here. If you're doing this like you're painting a house, that's not going to be good. You're going to get something that's called alligatoring. That's when your gel coat starts to wrinkle after you apply another coat of gel coat or resin. So make sure it's on very thick, because if it's too thin, it's not going to work. So I'm going to come back with more gel coat, and I'm not going to say glob it on, but basically you want to glob it on. You want it really thick, because 9 times out of 10, when you're brushing it on, you're more likely to have thin spots than thick spots.
The next day.
So after waiting overnight, let's take a look. Looks like we hardened up pretty good. That feels pretty nice, and it's not transferring my hand. That's usually a great indication you can move on to the next step. So for our first layer of fiberglass, we're going to pull out this tissue layer. It's very, very thin, very easy to rip. It's like 30 GSM fiberglass. And you can see how thin that is. Look at it. It's basically mimics a tissue. That's why I call it the tissue layer. And we'll go ahead and cut that to size off camera. And the resin we're going to be using is a polyester resin. Now this is a non-wax resin, which means when it cures, we don't have to sand in between the actual layers when we're applying fiberglass on top of fiberglass, which I'll go into the more later on. Now the amount we're going to use is about 4 ounces. It won't need that much because this tissue fiberglass is really thin, so it won't soak up too much. So we'll put it right in our cup, and we're going to need about 1.5% of 4 ounces, which is 1.77 milliliters of MEKP. So we'll use our eyedropper, get the amount we need. Then we'll go ahead and stir that up for 1 minute. And you're going to notice throughout this video, we're going to repeat basically the same steps quite often. Now let's work our way back to the mold. I'm going to go ahead and grab a chip brush. These are very cheap and easy to get a hold of and ideal for this situation. And we'll go place our tissue fiberglass right on top of our mold. Try to center it up as best we can. Doesn't have to be perfect because I gave myself excess amount. Dip my chip brush in my resin and go ahead and little by little just start saturating the fiberglass. Now I'm going to start in the middle just because it'll help get the wrinkles out when I work my way outward. Now notice how I'm applying the chip brush in stabbing motions. I'm kind of dabbing the resin right in the fiberglass. That's what we're going to do throughout this whole process. you're not going to really see me paint it on. You're going to see me basically stabbing it into the fiberglass. And since this layer is so thin, I can be very gentle with it, as well as it makes it easy to go ahead and fill all those voids in and prevent air bubbles. And while that's still wet, let's go and apply our second layer. Now this one's going to be a little bit thicker. This is 0.75 ounce matting. It's just slightly thicker, but still easy to work with. And you can see it's somewhat see-through. And we're going to apply about 6 ounces of resin. This should be more than enough. Since it is thicker, it's going to soak up a little bit more. And similar to what I did earlier, I went ahead and pre-cut this to size. Now if you want, you can pretty much use pieces of this and piece it together. You don't have to use one full sheet. I'm just using one full sheet just for convenience, just because it's so small, I don't need to really do pieces at a time. So I'm right now just trying to center it up, and I'm going to go ahead and continue the same stabbing motions we did earlier. Go in the middle and then work my way outward. Now one thing you will notice as you make these parts, for this particular matting or even heavier, it gets really easy to start manipulating it and maneuvering it once it's saturated. So if you get this whole thing soaked in resin and then you start stabbing it, it becomes a lot easier to get it where you want it. So sometimes I'll do that, I'll get it soaked, and then I'll go ahead and start stabbing it in place. And look at that. Just by doing it enough, it looks like it's one piece. So let's go ahead and bring it in. And looking at it, looks pretty good. I don't really see any air bubbles. That's a good sign. So far, everything looks pretty good. All right, well, let's go ahead and let that sit for a few hours until it cures. And after about 8 hours, do a knock test. Yep, seems pretty solid. So now let's go ahead and apply our next layer of matting. Now this is a lot thicker. This is 1.5 ounce. And when we compare it to the 0.75 ounce, you can kind of see a difference. You can kind of see through the 0.75 ounce, a little more transparent. Whereas the 1.5 ounce, you could definitely see how dense it is. And let's go ahead and mix up about 8 ounces of resin. Since this stuff is a little thicker, it's going to soak up a little bit more. And after we add our activator or hardener, we're again going to stir for 1 minute. Again, you're going to see the same consistency throughout this video. Now for this one, since it is thicker, we're going to apply a nice thin layer of resin right below it. It kind of helps soak it in. So when I do the stabbing motions later on, I don't have to add as much resin on top of it. So I'm just going to basically paint this on. It doesn't have to be pretty, just pretty much wet any area that you see any of the molding. And then we'll go put our layer of fiberglass matting right on top. I'm going to try to center this as best I can. The good news about having the resin beneath it, it kind of helps stick it in place too. So that feels good right there. And now let's grab our chip brush and go ahead and start stabbing away. And this one, go ahead and be a little bit generous with that resin just because this soaks it up like a sponge. So I'm going to start with the middle and work my way out. Now this may take a few minutes, but don't worry, it starts coming out looking really good the more and more you do it. And look at that. Looks like we had the exact amount of resin we needed. So let's go ahead and do that one more time. Let's go ahead and put another matting on top. Center it up, push it down a little bit, and you should start feeling some of it come through. Yep. And then we'll go ahead and continue the same stabbing motion with 8 ounces of resin. Now if you notice, I'm only going to do 2 layers at a time and then wait 6 to 8 hours. Because you don't want too much resin, too much fiberglass at once. You want to do basically 2 layers at a time, let it cure, and repeat. So yep, that feels pretty good. Now for this, we're going to do something slightly different. I'm going to go ahead and do 16 ounces. Since I know it needs about 8 ounces per layer, I'm going to go ahead and do 16 ounces total. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's my last layer, which means I'm going to have to add a surfacing agent, aka the wax. Now with the wax, instead of 1.5%, we're going to have to add 2% to our mix. So all I got to do is take a little bit of this, add it to our resin, and then we're good to go. So same song, different verse. Let's go ahead and pour our resin right inside our mixing cup. 16 ounces, of course. We're going to shake up our surfacing agent. It's wax. You kind of have to mix it up really well. Then I'll grab our eyedropper. Now it's very hard to see, but there are measuring steps or measuring lines right on those eyedroppers. That's how I know how much to put in there. So I'm going to start with 2% of this, which is about 9.5 milliliters. And then I'll add in our MEKP, 1.5%. Go ahead and stir for 1 minute. And make sure you get all around the edges. Make sure it stirs thoroughly. Same salt in reverse. We're going to go ahead and saturate the mold. Put our 1.5 ounce fiberglass matting. Start in the middle. Work our way out. And that looks pretty good. Add our last layer. Center it up. Same salt in reverse. And we'll go ahead and stab the last layer down. Now this has that wax in there, which means this will fully cure. So as a quick recap, because I know I threw a lot at you. For our first layer, we did our tooling gel coat. Then we added that small layer, that tissue layer. Then we stepped it up to 0.75 ounce. Then we added 2 sheets of 1.5 ounce. And then we added another 2 sheets of 1.5 ounce, but this one had wax added to the resin.
3 days later.
And after 3 days have passed, it looks like our mold is ready. So I'm going to go ahead and make some lines going along it just because it gives me something to cut along when I'm using my oscillating tool. Now you probably can do this within 2 days, but it depends on your weather. So just keep that in mind. If it's colder, you got to wait longer. And as far as the oscillating tool, this is perfect for cutting any of this fiberglass material. And I'm just going to go cut along the lines and do the best I can to get it as straight as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just good enough. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what we got. And looking at that, let's see if I can focus the camera a little bit. There we go. So you can see where the mold is and where our flange material is. You can see the seam right between it. That's a great sign. So we'll go ahead and take a trim removal tool and see if we can squeeze right between those two spots. I'm going to try to do this without blocking the camera too much, so bear with me. And looks like we can actually get in between it very easily. Look at that. That's actually really easy as far as getting around these edges. That's a good sign. And I'll just go ahead and work my way around. It looks like the poster board came off pretty easy. Look at this. That peeled right off. So, no, that was one easy step. Let's go ahead and peel the other side off. And now I'll go ahead and add a little bit of water in the seams because that PVA, that green film we put on, it dissolves in water. So by putting a little bit in there, kind of help loosen this up a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and get our trim removal tools right under our plug. Get a little air gap. And, yep, looks like we got it apart. Let's pick it up. And look at that. Looks very nice. Looks a little rugged because we still have PVA on it. But overall, that looks really good. Tell you what, let's go ahead and take this outside and go ahead and clean it up. And as I just mentioned earlier, that PVA, that green film, it dissolves very easily in water. So cleanup is very easy. So all I gotta do is take my water hose and just hose it down. And just make sure you get every nook and cranny covered, and then we just wipe it down with a microfiber cloth, and that's it. And now that our mold is cleaned up, let's go ahead and wet sand it a little bit. Now we're going to start with 1000 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to go ahead and see if we can get this a nice shine, just like we did with the plug earlier. So I'll take my soapy water, go ahead and soak everything down, and then I'll go ahead and grab an eraser block, and we'll go ahead and wrap the sandpaper right around it, just because it makes it easy as far as getting a uniform sanding surface. And similar to the steps we did earlier, we're going to start with 1000 grit, then we'll move up to 1500 grit, and then we're going to go ahead and finish it off with 2000 grit sandpaper. And now that we have a nice smooth dull finish, let's go ahead and polish it up. So I'll take that same McGuire's compound, grab an applicator pad, put a nice hefty amount on the applicator pad, dab it around our mold, and do the same song in reverse. Go ahead and swirl it around until we get a nice shiny surface. And once it starts looking pretty good, we'll go ahead and take our microfiber cloth and go ahead and wipe away any excess compound. And taking a look at what we got, look at that. Looks really nice, beautiful shine. It especially looks good where the plug was. I'm not worried about the flange so much, but right where the plug was, that looks really good. That's a perfect surface. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So now let's go ahead and work on by making the part. So the same steps as earlier, let's go ahead and wax the mold. So we'll take an applicator pad, in this case a microfiber cloth. And we'll go ahead and wax on the surface. Same thing as earlier, we're going to do 3 coats. We want to make sure this thing is definitely going to come apart. And that looks pretty good there. Wait an hour, wait for it to gas off. Look at that. Still has that beautiful mirror finish. That is awesome. So now let's go ahead and add our mold release agent. Again, same as earlier. So I'm going to use that film number 10. It's basically our PVA. I'm going to grab a foam brush and do the same thing here. And again, we're going to do 3 coats. So you're going to make sure you do nice thin coats. And you want to make sure they're dry in between the coats, so we're going to wait about 45 minutes. Now, as I said earlier, I did promise you both methods. So right now, this is the foam method, but I do prefer the spray gun just because it gives you nice, even coats. So for the setup, all you need is 22 PSI, a very small nozzle, 1.4 millimeters, and all you have to do is spray the whole thing back and forth. Again, small coats, 45 minutes in between, and that's it. And after waiting an hour after our final coat, we have a nice, beautiful shine. That's exactly what we want. When it seems like it's almost wet, that's usually an indication it is dry. I know it's kind of contradicting, but all you gotta do is feel the flange of your finger, and as long as you're not making a fingerprint, you're in great shape, and you can move on to the gel coat. So for this one, we're not using tool and gel coat. We're just going to pull out some regular black gel coat. Now you can use any color you want, but I just happened to get black at the time just because that's what they had. Now we'll go ahead and mix it up. I'm just using a painter's stir stick. And let's see if I can get the exact amount I want in there. I'm going to put about 6 ounces. I don't need that much. And pour it in there little by little. Looks pretty good. Then we'll add 1.5% of hardener or activator. Go ahead and stir for 1 minute. Again, same process as we've been doing throughout this whole video. And for this one, same thing. We're going to go ahead and brush it on. Now, like I said earlier, you do not want to do it thin like this. See how it's very thin? I'm doing it right now. That would give you bad results. So you usually want to go back right over it and make it super thick. Like I said, you almost want to glop it on. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just making sure it's thick and consistent. But of course, you can also do the spray gun method, which I highly recommend. For this setup, you're going to need about 60 PSI and a nozzle that's 2.5 millimeters. You're also going to need a little bit more gel coat when spraying. There seems to be a lot more overspray around the mold itself. But all you have to do is go back and forth and change your direction every time you do a layer. And you just go back and forth as many times. Usually I had to go about 8 or 9 times, roughly. And just make sure you have every nook and cranny covered and just make it consistent passes. And as you can see, that's all I'm doing. I'm going back and forth a couple times, and I change directions every time I do it. And looks pretty good. And the other good thing about using the spray gun, you can also check it with a thickness gauge. And we want about 25 mils, which is about a little over half a millimeter. And look at that. Came out looking beautiful. And that's pretty much all there is to it about those two methods. So same thing, you wait overnight, or about 6 to 8 hours. See, I press my thumb into it. You might see a thumb imprint, but it's not transferring to my finger. It's usually an indication that it's cured. So now let's go ahead and mix up about 10 ounces. And the reason I'm doing that, since I'm doing 2 layers at a time, I don't have to do individual layers. So same thing, we're going to start with our tissue layer. Dab it very gently with our chip brush, starting with the middle, working our way out. And just like earlier, this tissue layer or this thin fiberglass matting is going to eat about 4 ounces of resin. And then our next layer, which is our 0.75 ounce fiberglass matting, is going to eat the rest of the 6. So I'll get that in place, start in the middle, start dabbing it in, and then working our way out. And again, by starting with this thinner matting, it makes it a lot easier to work with, and it's less likely to have air bubbles when you're putting this all together, because you want all these layers to be one solid piece. So that looks pretty good. I don't see any air bubbles. Nice consistent color. Wait about 6 to 8 hours. Yep, feels pretty solid. And now we're ready to add our last layer. This is going to be about 16 ounces of resin, and all I'm going to do is just add 2 layers of 1.5 ounce fiberglass matting. And this is going to be with wax. It's not going to be as thick as the mold. It's going to be slightly thinner, because this is already going to be durable enough as it is. So I'm going to add 1 layer right there. Get in place and go ahead and start stabbing it. Again, start with the middle, work our way out. And as you can see, I'm kind of saturating the matting beforehand before I stab it all in, just because it makes it easier to maneuver. And then we'll go ahead and start dabbing it all in, getting rid of all these air bubbles. All right, last layer. Put it in place, stab that one to death. Get it nice and saturated, there we go. And this, again, this has the wax additive, which means this thing's going to cure no problem. And that looks pretty good.
3 days later.
And just like for the mold, we went ahead and waited 3 days. Looks pretty solid, looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and flip it over. Okay, looks pretty good from my end. And again, let's grab our trim removal tool. See if we can get in between the mold and our part. Come on. And that's the hardest part. Once you get in between it once, that's it. The rest of it starts getting a lot easier. And we'll start working our way around the flange. That feels pretty good right there. Let's go around this side of the flange and... oh, there we go. I actually felt that come apart. Look at that. Didn't require a lot of work at all. Now, if you look at it, it looks pretty rough, and that's expected. See how you see that big air bubble in the middle and all that? That's expected. That's from all that PVA. I wasn't able to show that to you earlier, but that's from all that film we applied on there. The stuff that dissolves underwater, that mold release agent, that's all it is. So you can either peel it off or you just wash it off. But looks pretty good, but let's go ahead and wash it off. So we'll go into our water hose, and it should just spray right off. Look at that. And that's starting to look like a good looking part. It has a nice beautiful shine. And pretty much we're going to keep rinsing it until all the bubbles are gone. Once the bubbles are gone, that usually tells you that mold release agent's all gone. So now let's go ahead and bring it inside. Look at that. It's got a nice beautiful shine. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a white marker and go along the edge. You don't really need to do this, but I'm doing it just because it kind of helps me give me a cutting area or a cutting surface to kind of not go too far on. And a little bit more. Yeah, it looks about right. So I'll try my best not to go past that white line. And again, take our oscillating tool, and we'll go ahead and start cutting off the flange. Alright, so that looks like that's the end of the big chunks. Now let's go ahead and grab our rotary tool. And let's go ahead and start cleaning up all these edges. So I'm basically going to sand down the edges just to make them smooth and to get rid of any of those sharp spots I created with the oscillating tool. And then we'll go ahead and grab our sander and go ahead and sand the bottom of this just to get rid of any sharp edges we have left behind, as well as give it a nice smooth surface. And for our last set of items, let's go ahead and drill out all our notches and holes. Now I'm going to take our rotary tool and go ahead and put a notch right here in the corner because there is a wire in our vehicle that runs through. So we'll go ahead and get that in there, and now I'm going to go ahead and try to round it off just to get rid of any sharp edges. And now we can go ahead and bring it to the bench and go ahead and drill our holes. So right at these spots right here, we need 2 holes drilled. I'm going to go ahead and do it from the back side just because there's a little bit more rigid area for me to work with. So I'm going to go about, I don't know, 10 millimeters up. That looks about center. Take my center punch, and right in the center, let's go ahead and punch a little notch in there. That will help as far as drilling the hole, and it'll prevent the drill bit from walking. So we'll press that down, give it about 2 slaps, and 1 more. There we go. So we got nice little notches in there. And now we'll take our stepper bit, and I'm probably going to go about 7/16 hole. That should be big enough. And then we'll go ahead and put in our drill. And I'll go ahead and start drilling these notches out just to pretty much just get it started. I'm not going to go through because I have a rag under it. And we'll go ahead and get the second one. There we go. Then I'll go ahead and hang it off the side, and we'll go ahead and drill the hole all the way through. So there's 1, and there's 2. And look at that. Nice clean holes. And of course we got to do a test fit. So let's go ahead and bring it to our vehicle. I'll take these fasteners off. Go ahead and throw it in place. Now, there's still a little dust on it, so bear with me. That attached very easily. Everything seems to line up very nicely. So far, it looks pretty good. Let me see if I can show you what I see. And looking at that, that actually came out looking pretty good. Contours very nicely to the vehicle. Looks like something that may have came out of the factory. Looks pretty good. Doesn't touch the strut tower cover at all, so that's a great sign. Yeah, not too shabby. I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and throw a coat of paint on there just for kicks. So I'm going to take some 600 grit sandpaper and just pretty much clean up and scuff up this gel coat. I can paint over it right now, but it's better if you scuff it up just a little bit, just so the paint adheres to it. Then we'll go ahead and rinse it off. Go ahead and take our alcohol and go ahead and wipe it down, get all those impurities out of there. Looks pretty good. Let that dry out. Then I'll grab my plastic paint and go ahead and do several passes. I'll probably do maybe like 3 or 4 coats. Start with a light coat. Wait about 5 to 10 minutes, do another coat. There are 5 to 10 minutes, we'll go and do a 3rd coat. And that's not too shabby right there. Let's get around the edges, around the back. And that looks pretty good right there. So now let's go ahead and try it on the other Mustang. So this is a nice beautiful orange. Let's see how this looks. Again, it's the same cover, nothing special. It's just got a fancy paint job. And that seems to fit pretty nicely, nice and snug. And now let's go ahead and take a walk around and take a look at it. And so far, this came out looking really good. It's got a beautiful shine, contours that strut tower cover very nicely. And I'm hoping this video gave you enough instructions to inspire you to make your own parts. Trust me, if I can do it, anyone can. Well, if you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe.
Round 1.
Fight!